On December 15, 1993, one Deutsche Mark bought 3.7 billion Yugoslav dinars on the Belgrade black market. 33 days earlier, the same Deutsche Mark had bought 1 million dinars. The currency had not been renamed, only renumbered. By January 1994, the monthly inflation rate would reach 313,563,558%. Prices doubled every 34 hours. The National Bank of Yugoslavia had already issued a 500 billion dinar note. It would lose its purchasing power inside 2 weeks of printing. This is the archive of the Yugoslav dinar, the third worst hyperinflation in recorded history. The warning signs were on the page. They were ignored. By the third quarter of 1991, 6 months before hyperinflation began, the National Bank of Yugoslavia was already monetizing the federal deficit. Seigniorage on the money supply was rising to fund a budget the dissolving state could no longer collect taxes against. The first warning was inside the money supply itself. M1. The share of liquid currency in the economy fell from 15% of GDP before the crisis to 7% in early 1993, to 3% by mid-year, and to 0.2% by late 1993. Yugoslavs were refusing to hold their own money. The Deutsche Mark had become the household store of value before the dinar's death was officially named. The third warning was in the real economy. In 1993, gross domestic product fell 30%. Industrial output collapsed 37%. Recorded unemployment reached 24.1%. The official figure understated the rupture. 1.3 million workers were on paid leave of absence, officially employed by firms that had stopped operating, drawing token wages. 750,000 were openly unemployed. Out of a labor force near 3 million, 2/3 had no productive work. The Belgrade Central Bank published these numbers in real time. Other central banks read them. Other ministries read them. Nobody acted. This episode is brought to you with support from a private community I run, a small group of people who care about the same things this channel cares about. The archive of how systems break, how money is built, how the warnings were always visible to anyone reading the data in real time. The link is in the description. No pitch, no promises. The same archive, in a smaller room. The trigger had a date, May 30th, 1992. United Nations Security Council Resolution 757. The resolution passed by a vote of 13 to none. China and Zimbabwe abstained. Within 24 hours, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, the rump state of Serbia and Montenegro after the breakup, was sealed off from the global economy. The text of 757 was specific. All trade with Yugoslavia was prohibited, except humanitarian goods. All financial transfers to and from the country were banned. Air traffic was suspended. Scientific, cultural, and sporting exchange suspended. Yugoslav diplomatic missions were ordered reduced. The intent of the resolution, in its own framing, was to politically and symbolically remove Yugoslavia from the community of nations. Before May 30th, the Belgrade government still had plausible paths to fiscal stabilization. International Monetary Fund support remained theoretically possible. Exports could fund imports. Foreign exchange reserves could defend the dinar. International borrowing was legal. After May 30th, every one of those paths closed simultaneously. The export base, the entire industrial capacity of an upper-middle income economy, could no longer sell abroad. The tax base derived from those exports vanished. Capital flight became the only rational private response, and capital fled. Foreign exchange reserves, already depleted by the wars in Slovenia and Croatia, could not be replenished. The Yugoslav state had one remaining revenue tool: it could print dinars. That single tool fed a single feedback loop. More printing forced faster price increases. Faster price increases shrank the real value of the money base. A smaller real base required more printing to fund the same state. The loop did not exit, it accelerated. The hyperinflation, by the standard 50% monthly threshold, began in March 1992. Resolution 757 made it irreversible. The arc from March 1992 to January 1994 lasted 22 months. The visible acceleration came in the final 2. By the end of 1992, the dinar had lost 99% of its value against the Deutsche Mark. By mid-1993, another 99% of what remained. The reform of October 1st, 1993, struck 6 zeros from the currency. One new dinar replaced 1 million old. It bought no time. 80 days later, on January 1st, 1994, the National Bank struck 9 more zeros. One January dinar replaced 1 billion October dinars. Inside the final 2 months, The data is in the daily black market exchange rate. On November 12, 1993, one Deutsche Mark bought 1 million dinars. On November 23, 1993, 11 days later, one Deutsche Mark bought 6.5 million dinars. By the end of November, one Deutsche Mark bought 37 million dinars. On December 11th, one Deutsche Mark bought 800 million dinars. On December 15th, 33 days after November 12th, one Deutsche Mark bought 3.7 billion dinars, a 3,700-fold devaluation in 33 days. Inside the same nominal currency unit, nobody had renamed it. On December 23, 1993, the National Bank issued the 500 billion dinar note. The portrait on the obverse was the 19th-century Serbian poet Jovan Jovanović Zmaj. The reverse showed the National Library of Belgrade. The note's purchasing power, converted to Deutsche Marks at the day's black market rate, collapsed within 2 weeks. In January 1994, the monthly inflation rate reached 313,563,558%. Prices doubled every 1.4 days. Annualized, the rate exceeded 116 trillion%. In Hanke and Krus's database of 56 recorded hyperinflations through 2013, only Hungary in July 1946 and Zimbabwe in November 2008 reached higher monthly peaks. Yugoslavia, January 1994, holds third place. What did the death of the dinar do to the people who held it? In October 1993, Belgrade ran out of bread. The federal government had imposed price controls to slow the inflation. The controls pushed producer prices below the cost of flour. Bakers stopped baking. For 1 full week, the capital had no bread on its shelves. The price controls were lifted. The bakers returned. The bread came back at a price most could not afford. On November 8th and 9th, 1993, mass crowds gathered outside private exchange offices, the Menjaknica, when the bank transfer rate ran 300% above the black market street rate. Most retail stores closed and posted poppies, inventory, signs in their windows. They were waiting for the spiral to end. In early December 1993, the Belgrade public transport workers walked off the job. 2 weeks of pay, converted to Deutsche Marks at the black market rate, equaled 4 Deutsche Marks. A family of 4 in Belgrade required, on the same calculation, 230 Deutsche Marks per month for basic survival. Government pensions were paid through post offices. The federal budget did not transfer enough funds to the post offices. Pensioners arrived to collect and were turned away, or paid in notes that lost half their value before the queue dispersed. By late 1993, the average monthly pension at the black market exchange equaled approximately 5 Deutsche Marks. Out of a labor force near 3 million, 1.3 million were on paid leave of absence, officially employed by firms that had stopped operating, drawing token wages. 750,000 were openly unemployed. Roughly 2/3 of the working-age population had no productive work. The Deutsche Mark, illegal to use as official tender, became the unit of account in every household. Prices in shops were displayed in Deutsche Marks, with a today's rate multiplier rewritten on cardboard each morning. The reform had a name, Avramović, a date, January 24, 1994. Dragoslav Avramović, a Yugoslav-American economist who had spent decades at the World Bank, was recalled to Belgrade in late 1993. On January 24, 1994, he announced the monetary Reconstruction program. The program had 2 clauses that mattered. First, a new currency, the Novi dinar, would be issued at par with the Deutsche Mark. 1 Novi dinar would be worth 1 Deutsche Mark. At the moment of issue and forward, the peg was the program. Second, only 150 million Novi dinars would be issued. Backed by foreign exchange and gold reserves the National Bank had managed to preserve. The bank publicly committed not to print Novi dinars beyond what could be sustained at the peg. 4 prior redenominations in as many years had failed because they only struck zeros. They reset the labels. The underlying monetary expansion continued. The peg did not strike a single zero. It did something different. It changed the rules of issuance. The state's printing press became publicly auditable against a fixed reference. Continued printing would now break the peg in front of the entire population. The dinar held. By March 1994, 6 weeks after the reform, the money supply had stabilized. Shortages eased. Avramović was named governor of the National Bank on March 2, 1994. The citizens called him Deda Avram, Grandfather Avram. The Novi dinar held its peg through most of 1994. UN sanctions were partially suspended on November 22, 1995, after the Dayton Agreement. Fully lifted October 1996. By then Avramović had been dismissed, May 1996, over disagreements with the Milosevic government on further reform, the dinar weakened again. It would not return to hyperinflation, but it would never again hold a Deutsche Mark peg. Yugoslav citizens who held dinar-denominated savings continuously from 1990 through January 1994 lost essentially 100% of their value. Only those who held Deutsche Marks in cash or hard goods preserved wealth. The DM mattress, a literal cash hoard outside the banking system, became and remains an embedded cultural memory in Serbia. The pattern is older than Yugoslavia: sanctions, war finance, deficit monetization, the collapse of money demand, the spiral. The same sequence appeared in Weimar Germany in 1923, in Hungary in 1946, in Zimbabwe in 2008, in Venezuela through the second half of the 2010s. The trigger was different in each case. The mechanism was not. By Hanke and Krus's measure, the Yugoslav dinar produced the third worst hyperinflation in recorded history. The largest single banknote, 500 billion dinars, issued December 23, 1993, lost its purchasing power within 2 weeks of printing. 5 redenominations, 20 zeros struck in 4 years, 2/3 of the workforce idled, an upper-middle income economy reduced to barter, with the Deutsche Mark traded under the table as the household unit of account. The warnings were inside the money supply, inside the bond market, inside the strike notices of bus workers. They were published in the National Bank's own statements every week in advance of the collapse they described. Every currency that died had a warning. Nobody listened.